pick up our sweating in here. Okay. And we're starting in a section that contains some things that seems like maybe they don't go together. So this unit has respiratory system, which is about breathing and gases, and gas exchange. And then we have urinary system, which is about kidneys and urine and urination. And then there's a section at the end about fluid balance and acid-base stuff. And the reason that these are together in a unit is that your respiratory system and your urinary system work together to maintain fluid balance and pH and ions and blood gases together. So they actually are functioning together and they have a lot of interconnectedness. But we start with the respiratory system, and everybody knows that the respiratory system helps you breathe and it helps you get air in and out, and that's called ventilation. So technical term for just getting the air in your lungs and back out is ventilation. There are three other big functions that your respiratory system does that are less known because they involve chemistry type stuff. And so those are called external respiration, gas transport, which is the gases moving through your blood in the bloodstream, and then something called internal respiration. The ventilation is completely going on with lungs. So that's air going in and out of lungs. The external respiration part is stuff moving between the air in the blood, the air in the lungs and the blood. And I call it lung air. So we've got gases moving between lung air and blood. Gas transport is just involving the blood carrying those gases from the lungs to the rest of the body. And then the internal respiration is the movement of the gases from blood into the body cells. What are the two gases that we most care about in all this? Oxygen and carbon dioxide. Yeah. So for, well, really all of these functions, oxygen and CO2 are the important gases that we care about moving through the respiratory system. So, I forgot to print your lab diagrams. I'll bring those on Monday. Too much going on this week. So we're going to today look at respiratory anatomy and ventilation. That's the specific topics for today. And some of these you may already know, and some of them are new. And there's actually a lot of anatomy up in your head that goes with respiratory system that might be new. But we divide respiratory system into two sections called tracts. It's not track with a K, but tracts. And your upper respiratory tract is basically from the nose and mouth down through the back of your throat and until you enter the larynx. So upper respiratory tract is your nose, which is the outside part, the nasal cavity, which is the space inside. Sinuses connect, and then you have this section in the back here called pharynx. The pharynx. And somebody had a question about pharynx before this last test. Are you kidding me? It is now leaf blowing time or leaf sucking time. So, okay. Now I'm glad I didn't open the window. I don't know. There's a lot of challenges today. Okay, so pharynx. Pharynx indicates what we think of in normal terms as the back of your throat. And it's got three regions to it, or three prefixes. So we've got nasopharynx, which is the section that is behind your nose or behind your nasal cavity. And we have oropharynx, which is the part behind your tongue, behind your oral cavity. And then there's a part lower down that's still pharynx, but it's called laryngopharynx. Laryngopharynx, which is behind the larynx, which is the top of your windpipe, let's say. So anything pharynx is the back of your throat, and then the prefix tells you which part of the pharynx are we talking about. So you can breathe, you can be a nose breather and move air through nasopharynx, or you can be mouth breather, which a lot of people are this time of year because we're snotty, and move air through your oropharynx. But all of the air eventually needs to go through laryngopharynx and then enter lower respiratory system. So we have this structure called the epiglottis right here. Epiglottis, and it's a cartilage flap, and when we are not swallowing, it is folded up like this, and it's going to let air go into the windpipe. If we are swallowing, the epiglottis is going to fold down so that food goes down the esophagus and not down the airway. That's epiglottis, and you're going to have that on respiratory anatomy tomorrow. It's actually important for swallowing also, but we include it with respiratory. So that's this epiglottis. Okay. So next picture that we're going to look at, we're looking at lower respiratory structures. So once you're past the laryngopharynx, the air is going to enter lower respiratory, which goes through larynx. This is hard to spell. I don't really have a tip for it. It's got a lot of consonants, larynx, and then through trachea. And then your trachea splits into two main sections called bronchi. So this is a bronchus, this is a bronchus. Together they are bronchi. And the bronchi then branch into bronchial tree, and then you've got lung tissue. This is looking from the front of the person. This is the beginning of it from a side cross section. So this has got some of those same structures as we see on here. And your lower respiratory system, most of it has cartilage support. There's cartilage support in these tissues for what we call the airway. Oh, yeah. So when you're seeing that this looks whitish, there's a lot of cartilage and this is rigid and it's supposed to hold an open airway. So up in the larynx, you've got these particular supporting cartilage called thyroid cartilage because it's under the thyroid, and cricoid cartilage here. And then you've got trachea, and the trachea has cartilage rings around it. We'll see a picture of that coming up. But all that together is lower respiratory system. Your lungs do not have cartilage. Your lung tissue is actually spongy and flimsy. We don't have you dissect lungs because I don't know, like, how do you even cut through it and look at it? They kind of just collapse on each other. So the lungs itself has no cartilage, and it's actually some of the flimsiest, least supported tissue in your body because air is supposed to hold it open. So as we're moving air, did I give you these already? You already had this slide. It's the urinary, okay, it's the urinary structure it's supposed to bring. Do that on Monday. I just saw that, I'm like, oh. So as air is moving through this system, it's got oxygen and CO2 in it. But oxygen and CO2, as they're moving through upper respiratory and then lower respiratory, the gases are not able to get to the blood until they get to lung tissue. So all the paths that the air takes in and out through upper and lower respiratory, except for lungs, that's called conducting zone. So there's no exchange of gases, just conducting. And all through that section of the conducting zone, there is going to be epithelial lining that creates mucus. We need mucus in the respiratory tract to moisten the air and to trap pathogens. And a lot of the epithelium in there has these cilia that they wave and they push the mucus upward. So this, we can see here, this is a cross section of the trachea, and on the inside, it's got epithelium. And it's ciliated to flap mucus upward always. It would produce mucus, and then there's a cartilage ring around it. And notice it's not a complete closed ring, it's more like that. There's a space back here where the cartilage isn't. When you did look at trachea under the microscope, you look for the cartilage ring around that open space, and that tells you that it's the trachea. So your trachea has those cartilage rings, and it's vertical and fairly wide open and fairly straight. And then when it gets close to the lungs, it splits into these parts called bronchi, or two, more than one, or bronchus for one. And the bronchi direct air into left and right lungs. They still have cartilage as well, hold open the airways. And then now we're kind of zooming ahead, and I don't think you had this picture on your lab diagrams. We're going down to like really small structures. So this picture is kind of like imagining, okay, we have come through the main bronchus and the secondary bronchus, the tertiary bronchus, and now we're kind of out at the ends of the branching, let's say. And where these airways kind of end in their branches, these are called terminal bronchioles, like little bronchus. And this would be a terminal bronchiole. And by the time the airways have branched that much, there's no more cartilage holding them open. So you've got still an airway in there, and it's got a space, it's got an epithelium, which we see in the light pink, but there are these bands of smooth muscle around there. Got little muscle bands around the ends of your airways. And those airways are then connecting to air sacs in the lungs, which is coming up next. Something to note about this muscle is that these muscle bands can tighten, or let's say they can constrict, or they can dilate the airways. And to me, this is one thing in the body that doesn't make sense, why you would need to constrict your airway. Like, how is that helpful? How is that helpful? It's frequently harmful. How is that helpful? I don't know how it's helpful. I don't know what the purpose of it is, but people that are having really bad asthma attacks are having intense constriction of these airways. And it doesn't matter how like nicely wide open all these cartilage structures are, if the tiny, tiny, small airways are closed off next to the lungs. So we'll be taking a look at that a little bit later. So these bronchioles, the end sections of your airways, are connecting with actual lung tissue. And that's here in the pink. And these are the alveoli, or the air sacs. And they kind of look like the tiniest bunch of grapes, except on the inside, they are connected by airspace. So we should have, when we breathe in, air comes through the bronchioles and it comes into the air sacs and they kind of inflate and deflate. So they stretch and they go back as air comes in and out. As the air is coming in and out of these air sacs, they have super thin walls, and on the other side of the epithelial wall, there's capillary networks. So these are the pulmonary capillaries around the air sacs. And the pulmonary capillaries are the point of the whole pulmonary circulation. So when we learn in circulatory system that the left side of the right side of your heart pumps blood to the lungs, pick up oxygen, blah, blah, blah. This is where it's happening in the pulmonary capillaries that surround the air sacs. And your book is drawing the direction of blood flow. So if you've got this picture, make the word in. Write the word in, blood is coming in. This direction, and blood will come back out in this direction, and they've colored it blue versus red, right? To show low oxygen, high oxygen. So we can make that note on here also. The blood that comes in probably is going to have low oxygen. But if your lungs are healthy and they're functioning, by the time the blood goes past the air sac, it's coming out with high oxygen. And you probably already know that, but I think it's useful to write it. So your lung capillaries are where you are doing external respiration. So I'm going to come back to this slide, but go back to this first one right here. Now that we have seen the anatomy of the lungs, we can say that the external respiration is happening between the alveoli and the pulmonary capillaries. And I think we had written over on this side, it's between the lung air and the blood. That's true. Now we know the terms. It's between the alveoli and the pulmonary capillaries is that gas exchange. Now let's go back to this slide. So for gas exchange to work, for those gases, oxygen and CO2 to be able to move well, there needs to be not really much between the air and the blood in the capillary. So they're going to diffuse these gases. And anything that is getting between the air and the capillary is going to hinder the gases from moving. So a healthy lung is going to have very thin walls around the alveoli and just a little bit of mucus or fluid in there. But if you've got other stuff that's blocking or scarring, the person can be ventilating and getting air in and out, but they're not getting gas exchange. So what are some examples of that? I'm going to wait for the asthma video. Oh, wait. Okay, this is a place where I used to put more slides before I switched to this book. So we need a little bit, we do need some extra info here. Don't try to write this. I need to look ahead at something and see if I now have this in a different slide set than I used to. Yeah, it's in this next slide set. All right, so we're going to go on to mechanics of breathing. This section is answering the question, how do we get air in and out? How do we do ventilation? How do we make the air move in and out of the lungs? Because that needs to keep happening all the time, constantly, your whole life. How do we do that? What are the mechanics of it? And to understand the mechanics of breathing, there's a little bit of physics of gases involved. And this is something that I really don't know where this is taught before college, but I'm pretty sure you have not had it during college, probably, if you started here as a freshman. And it's the relationship between pressure and volume of a gas. Ashley, do you think sometime in like high school or middle school, you ever had this gas pressure thing?
Not in detail.
Not in detail. I mean, I wouldn't, it's kind of a chemistry thing. It's kind of a physics thing. So in chemistry, yeah, I think it's called like Boyle's law or something like that. Yeah,
Well, it's just like a formula.
Yeah.
He gave us, and then
yeah.
it's kind of like more like an idea.
Yeah, we when you say more of an idea, we're not going to do math with it, but we need the idea. So these red things here are gas molecules, and gases, to be a gas, you have to be dispersed in the air and you bounce around everywhere. And gases will bounce off the walls of the container. That makes sense. And if the container has a big volume and you have a certain amount of gas, the gas molecules hit the wall at a certain frequency and they give a pressure. So I always imagine this like you've got a bunch of toddlers or something in a room and they're literally bouncing off the walls. So This would be like putting toddlers in, the dining hall. You take the same amount of toddlers and you put them in this classroom and they run around like they do, they're gonna bounce off the wall more often. Because there's less space and there's the same number of them. So when we have the same amount of gas in a large volume, that creates a lower pressure. Same amount of gas in a smaller volume creates a higher pressure. So as you change one, the other one changes as well. Something that is important to understand breathing is that we're going to assume that we're always in an environment of normal air pressure, like in this room. So this is not people in outer space, and this is not people in an airplane where the window's broken and all the air sucks out. This that we're describing depends on us being in just normal air pressure around us that's basically constant. Second thing to know that relates to air movements has to do with your lung structure. And I want you to write these words down before I say anything else. So we kind of just mentioned your actual lung tissue is real flimsy. And here we've got some lung tissue and there's some air sacs here and there's a lining over that called visceral pleura. Professor Rudd may have called that something different in lab. And it's kind of super thin like plastic wrap. And then there's another lining that's inside your chest cavity called parietal or the wall pleura, also with the consistency of plastic wrap. And in between there, there's a space and there's a liquid. So if you have ever gotten plastic wrap, you're trying to put the plastic wrap on the food and it folds over on itself. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm never getting this part now. Maybe you threw it away and you just started it again because they really stick to each other. So this setup of having two flimsy linings with liquid in between means that your lungs stick to the chest wall or they adhere to the chest wall. And that's super, super important to how they work. Because if you move your chest wall, that means your lungs are going to move with it. Very important. There's a condition that people can get called pneumothorax, which is when they get air not just air, it's air leaks into that space for some reason. So you're only supposed to have a little liquid in here holding these layers together. If you get air in there, it disrupts the interaction. And that could be because people's lungs are so damaged that the lining breaks and air gets in there. Or if they get traumatic injury like they're stabbed or they get in a car wreck and it punctures their lung. That's punctured lung is pneumothorax, and that causes lung collapse. Your lung tissue by itself is so flimsy that if it is not held to the chest wall by this membrane, liquid membrane interaction, the outside air pressure will just collapse this. And that's what collapsed lung is. It's called pneumo for air, thorax, air chest. You get air in between those layers. So those are the facts, like when you know how gases act, and we need to know that your lung lining sticks to the chest wall. Then we can look at how do you get air in. That's called inspiration. The physiological meaning of inspiration. So that's how we get air into the lungs. And this picture has some pressures listed here with numbers. We're not going to worry about that, but we do need some information about diaphragm coming up next. So when we do inspiration, what we're doing is we're increasing the area of the lungs. We're increasing the volume. So we're going to increase the lung volume by expanding the chest cavity. And when we do that, the air that is already in our lungs, because they're never totally empty from air, the air that is in there is going to decrease in pressure. This would be like if we have the toddlers in this room and they're bouncing off the walls and they're crazy and we just can't stand it. If suddenly the room walls started moving apart and they had more space, the pressure would drop. You might feel like, yeah, I can handle this now. Pressure would drop. And if the pressure inside the lungs is less than the outside, air is going to go in. So all we need to do to get air in the lungs is to get our lung pressure a little bit lower than the room air, and air will rush in. Unless you're choking or unless you're drowning, that's going to work. So you just need to get your lung pressure low by expanding your chest cavity. And the way that we expand the chest cavity is by contracting some muscles. We contract certain muscles to do this. Did you look at diaphragm where it was on the models on Tuesday? Good. It has a G in it. And it has a PH in the word. So you've got a while before the lab test, but this is a tricky word to spell. But it's nice to be able to know how to spell it. Dia is PH, and then there's a G, diaphragm. So when you contract your diaphragm, it goes from the dome shape, which is the relaxed shape. That's kind of weird to think about. It's normally like this, domed up. Here we go. See how it's kind of dome shaped here? On the models in the lab, that's the relaxed state. So you might write on here, this is the relaxed. But when we contract that muscle and shorten it, the diaphragm moves down and it becomes flat or close to flat. So maybe you could draw in here a flat line and write on top of that contracted. Contracted. That lining between the lungs and the torso cavity is also down here where the diaphragm is. So if the diaphragm goes from relaxed and domed to contracted and flat, the lungs expand with it. So I want you to put your, I got black marker on me, put your hands around your ribs, and I want you to try to breathe without expanding your ribs, just your stomach. Make your stomach go in and out. Can you do it? Those are kind of little breaths, right? Now do a really big breath. Feel your ribs move. So you can breathe just by contracting your diaphragm. Those are quiet breaths, and it just moves down and it expands your thoracic cavity. So they've got the down arrow here. If you're trying to breathe in more, or if you're doing singing or instruments or your sport and you're breathing hard, you also will contract your external intercostals, which are little muscles between your ribs. So you've got these layers of muscles between ribs, and the ones on the outside are external intercostals, and they pull your ribs kind of up and out, and that expands your chest cavity too. Diaphragm is the most important, but external intercostals help also. So that makes bigger chest cavity, lower pressure, and air rushes in. We've got to move our diaphragm to do that. What if you have on a corset? Do you know what I mean? What are those ladies supposed to do? Really shallow breathing. And it depends on how high the corset is. In the days when women were supposed to wear corsets to be respectable, a lot of them passed out. And the, concept of women being so fragile and delicate in those days, the corsets were really contributing to that. Women aren't fragile or delicate. You need to move your diaphragm. This is also why you can't sing well in tight pants. I always have to remember, like, there's certain pants I should not wear to church when I'm going to sing. So fortunately, it doesn't take much to get air in. You just need to contract your diaphragm and maybe your external intercostal. And we have a certain nerve that helps us do that. It's one of your cranial nerves called phrenic, another PH word, phrenic. And that allows you to, without thinking about it, keep moving your diaphragm and keep breathing to stay alive. What if we had to think about it? That'd be so annoying. How could you do school and all that? How could you do your job? Breathe. Breathe. So our brain controls that automatically. It's through this particular cranial nerve 5. People that get in a bad accident and have that nerve damaged or severed, they almost die instantly because they can't breathe anymore. It's grim, but fortunately, it's pretty well protected by bones of the vertebra. Okay, so this chart goes through all the different processes required for inspiration. I want to write a more understandable version over here. It's going to match, but just with fewer words. So we have phrenic nerve impulse leads to contract diaphragm and the external intercostals, maybe, definitely the diaphragm, which expands torso cavity. And if you're expanding your torso cavity and your lungs adhere through the linings and the liquids, your lungs also expand, which leads to lower pressure than the outside air, which leads to air rushes in. Y'all heard me say I didn't have a lot of mammal systems training when I was in college, and I didn't learn this stuff because I don't need this to study microbes and plant diseases. And when I learned this, I was surprised by how basic that is. Like something like breathing. So vital to our life. We got to get air in, we got to get air in. This is all it is. This is all it is. It's not that bad. And getting air out is even more simple. So that's what we're gonna look at next. This is inspiration, and you just need diaphragm and maybe external intercostals contract, and then it's just everything happens so easily. It's great. So once you get air in, you also need to breathe it back out, and that's expiration. Very particular meaning of the word expiration. Let the air back out. And I like this cartoon because they show the dotted line is like the size of your torso cavity during inspiration, and during expiration, it just goes back to relaxed. So you kind of move torso volume from here to here. So we decrease the volume in the chest cavity. And this would be like, if we got the toddlers in the calf in the dining hall, suddenly the walls close in, or we make them all go in that little annex room. It's like, oh God, why did we do this? This is not good. They need more space to spread out. But if you make the volume less, the pressure increases. And as soon as the pressure in the lungs increases where it's higher than the room air or the outside air, air is going to rush out. Air will be rushing out just by making our torso cavity smaller again. And for this, you don't even have to contract a muscle to get air to move out. You know, at a low level, all you got to do is relax. All you have to do is relax the diaphragm and relax external intercostals, and your chest cavity gets smaller, the pressure goes up, the air rushes out. So let's do a similar list for expiration. So expiration, we relax the diaphragm. And the external intercostals, and we don't even need our brain to tell us to do it. Just kind of stop getting a signal, muscles relax, and your torso cavity gets smaller. Which causes your lung volume to get smaller. And the air pressure in your lungs gets higher than the outside pressure. Air rushes out. You just relax. Just relax and air rushes out. If you want to blow air out forcefully, there are some modifications to that, but that's how we get air rushing out. Yeah, we got to stop now in the class. We'll begin with these slides and then also have a new set for Monday, and I'll bring you your kidney slides for lab on Monday. Those actually have a lot of labels, so meant to get them. If you want to go print them from Canvas, they're in Canvas too. But I'll bring them on Monday. Woo! I hope your next classroom is cooler. Oh man, we're probably Katie, we're gonna go take our test in another room.
Thank you.
It's too hot. What do I gotta do? I gotta stop recording.